One of the biggest successes has been getting the College of Arts and Sciences to complete the template for learning outcomes assessment for all the departments. And surprising when they first look at it, it was intimidating because it had 6 columns of information that needed to be populated. But when you take it step by step, and then having the deans buy-in and support and encouragement, encouraging the department chairs to get this done, and it looks fantastic. I mean, it still needs to be reviewed, and this will be the first year that we started, but this will prepare us for continued learning outcomes assessment. That has been a huge success, and I think that it will encourage the schools to have a better process for collecting and maintaining this information over time, as opposed to just being a one-time thing. So, I think that's been the biggest success. Another success has honestly been just the motivation that faculty have now to even get involved in assessment and evaluation. It's not just a very stressful, these 2 words, they run for the hills when you say assessment, program review, assessment, evaluation, it's very stressful. But I think that a lot of faculty members, more than the ones that were when I first began, or even in other locations where I've worked in assessment, initially it's very scary, but it takes just a lot of encouragement from the deans and for the assessment person not to make it seem scary, for them to get it motivated. So that's been a success. More faculty are engaged in assessment and evaluation than they were at the beginning. Being very clear, educating the departments about what data is available, how you can actually answer the question through numbers, through projects, through outcomes. And just because the outcome is, I expect for students to be able to communicate effectively, determining what exactly that is and working with them, just going over, well, what does this really mean? What does communicate effectively really mean? Is critical analysis different than just analysis? Is it redundant? What do you mean, and how are you providing this exposure to information so that a student can move from just an analysis to a critical analysis? So it's been communication and constant engagement with faculty and constant engagement with the departments, and for me, having an open door so that when they want to evaluate something, we can look at the rubrics and determine that maybe philosophy can tweak the oral communication rubric so that it meets their needs. That's okay. That there's no one way to do things. So I think communication with the faculty has been a big factor.
So I think being part of the process from sort of beginning to end, so getting involved in thinking specifically about our general education, I was able to be involved in when we were first developing rubrics and refining rubrics to use, to have some kind of common language to be able to evaluate student work, and then being able to contribute student data, or student work I should say, to generate the data and see where our students were falling, to what degree they were meeting these objectives, and being able to use those data in my own classroom and seeing the connections, I guess, between the general education work and my own teaching. And so kind of the entire involvement, seeing the whole process has definitely been very useful.
In a previous location, there was an exam that was used to measure whether or not students acquired information in various aspects of veterinary school. And the exam was used using a statistical technique called item response theory rationalysis that the analyst was working on and then left, right? So then someone else takes on this project and they're able to, present the same information. But the problem is the faculty involved, or that were evaluating the outcomes of these exams, because there was a pre and a post test, couldn't understand exactly what was being presented altogether, even when the first analyst was doing this. And one of the mistakes people make is assuming that you need high-level statistical analysis to get the answers to things. Now, you can determine that a student has, there has been a level of scaffolding from initial to, final, that they learned some information. But that could be attributed to just mere exposure, or it could actually be knowledge acquisition. It's important for faculty to understand what it is they're being presented so that they can take that data and move on it and make changes. Now, what was really happening was the development of an exam and trying to make sure it was standard. So no matter what cohort took the exam, if they took it in the initial stages, because they're in the beginning, you'd have this outcome. If you took it at the end, you'd have this outcome, regardless of the cohort. So there was a miscommunication about the purpose of the exam. They wanted to see whether or not students were learning, and what they really were seeing is how good the exam was. That item response theory is for that purpose, to show that there's a level of movement, or that certain questions are difficult or not difficult for everyone, or some people, or a certain student that's stellar is more likely to get this question correct versus someone who does not achieve as well. That's what was really happening, and what the information was being used for was to determine whether or not students were learning.
I think as a faculty, we really came together to develop learning outcomes that we felt our students should have by the time they graduate. We have 2 majors in our department, so for each major, we developed a set of learning outcomes, and we talked about how we would make sure that our students achieve those outcomes, mapped the curriculum so that we saw which courses would be required to make sure that they achieve those, and then started to collect data and be able to look at student work and see how they were achieving these outcomes. And so that stalled, partly because when we have our assessment of certain skills, we have more opportunities, I guess, to be able to catch those skills in different courses through writing, for example. But the content knowledge is harder to catch because oftentimes we have our upper division courses that get canceled because of low enrollment, and so we're not able to capture that content because the students aren't being exposed to it. So that allowed us to see that we have to modify our curriculum a little bit in a way to make sure that students get there. But that also was a difficult thing for faculty, because when we say these are the things that we expect our students to know, and then we kind of need the administration to support allowing those courses to run to make sure the students actually get that content.
I think there is a significant disconnect that something as simple as the board's participation in meetings being used, whether or not there's all types of things from student affairs, SUPD. There's aspects outside of just learning where assessment can be used to determine whether or not we're using resources appropriately, space is being utilized sufficiently. But I think the bigger disconnect is just these student areas knowing that they need to evaluate whether programming is effective in improving the student experience. That's the biggest disconnect that I've experienced. If your diversity services office has all of these programs, but students still feel like they don't have a place to be represented, then how do you know that? How do we change that? And I think we stay focused on assessment in the educational realm, but there's also assessment in the social and psychosocial realm.
So when I think about our general education assessment, that is part of committee work. So we have our general education committee, and because it's part of a committee and it contributes to service of the campus community, that helps to sustain that work. We do also, not necessarily a retreat, but when we do the assessment work, the committee deals with a lot of general education issues, but when we do the assessment work, we sometimes hold what we call a hootenanny, where we have pizza and we have several faculty, at least 2 faculty members assessing each piece of student work, and so we kind of bring everyone together and it feels like a collaborative environment when we're doing that assessment. And so I think I think those things have contributed to the sustainability of that assessment work. Of course, we have to do assessment for accreditation and things like that, but I don't think that's the reason it's sustained on our campus. I think the reason is because of the community that we've built for assessment.
I do think there needs to be a person committed, maybe at each school, to the assessment and evaluation of the school. And that's just, like I said, the conduit between institutional research or the university assessment person and the schools to make sure that there's that constant contact. You know, when it comes to evaluating or even assessment, for example, writing samples, there needs to be someone to do it. Well, who has time to do that? You know, there's small institutional research offices that have loads and loads of work to do. They cannot read 300 samples of writing from various courses and then do the analysis and provide the information back to the school. So there needs to be probably a significant amount of support needed when these things are being conducted. And technology. So something like a scanner. Now, we all have moved towards something like course evaluations online, but you know, you also probably need something that can take in information physically, paper evaluations. So, you know, those things interfere with the departments or the deans being able to evaluate how well a faculty member was rated in a course. Now, these things don't necessarily go on like a learning outcomes assessment, but they are part of just the department's evaluation of whether or not it's, you know, functioning in the best way, or whether or not it has the appropriate resources, or whether there's too many classes, or maybe there's too many adjuncts. You know, evaluation assessment goes way beyond just, you know, whether or not students are learning, even though that's one of the main focuses. But it's important to have just even the standard technology that can interfere with us getting things done. If someone is hand entering something into the system, you know, that slows things down. So I think it's important to have, you know, very useful technology, but if it's not available, it will slow things down.
So I think that funding is something that I have heard that there are a lot of campuses that support assessment work with the funding, and we don't have that on our campus. And I imagine that tying funding to some assessment work may help to get more faculty involved. And so I think that may have limited the assessment work on campus, is just being able to provide some funding for that work. When there are assessment projects that have funding associated with them, so for example, Fitchburg State collaborated with Mount Wachusett Community College to do assessment work across our campuses, developing rubrics and looking at student work. And so there was a stipend that was associated with that work, and there were a lot more faculty involved at that point. And so I think there is a connection between the availability of funding and assessment work on campus.
I think the provost greatly recognizes assessment and the need for it. It's an imperative and a requirement as far as she's concerned. As far as outside of that, you know, it's a job. When faculty participate in the assessment and evaluation tasks, they are not given service hours, and you know, it's kind of an expectation that you want to make sure that you're providing. Again, I mean, this is a service to students, a stellar education and appropriate and frequent opportunities for learning and demonstration and practical applications. So there could be more in that sense, and I believe that we'd probably have more faculty buy-in if it was considered a service and something that they, you know, can as one of their professional development opportunities, you know, that they participate in more depth. But you know, it is respected greatly by the provost. It's respected greatly by the vice provost. The deans, like I said, you must have their support. So here at the institution, I think we have that. I think as we move forward and other things take precedent over the fact that we have accreditation coming up or there's a site visit, once those things go into the background, keeping them motivated?
So we do have several opportunities on our campus to be involved in assessment and to have that valued. So I did talk a little bit about some funding that's available for faculty to apply for to do assessment work beyond their normal classroom assessment. And so that's been a nice incentive, I think, to have faculty involved in assessment work. We do have a lot of professional development opportunities, I would say. The assessment office supports faculty who want to attend local conferences or national conferences. So, for example, the NEAN has several conferences a year, the AMCOA conferences, and then the AAC&U General Education and Assessment conferences. So we've been able to, the campus has sent faculty to all of these conferences, and that helps a lot because we can hear from other campuses of what they're doing. We can modify our process if necessary. So we also have professional development opportunities on our own campus, kind of internal ones. And so I think that helps to spread the word of what we're doing on campus and how some faculty are using it in their own classrooms. And hopefully the idea is that other faculty will see that there is value in doing that assessment work and that you can tie it to your own classroom. So there are a lot of professional development opportunities, I would say.